Hi, and welcome to episode 37 of the Breaking Bio podcast. I'm Morgan Jackson, a PhD student at the University of Guelph in Ontario, Canada. And today we've got a special guest, David Hughes, who'll be talking all about zombies and video games and all sorts of other cool stuff. But first, we'll introduce our other co-host, Stephen Hamblin.
I'm Stephen Hamblin, postdoc at the University of New South Wales in Sydney, Australia.
And as I mentioned, our special guest this week is David Hughes, who's an assistant professor at Penn State University.
Hi, how are you? Well, I'm very glad to be here.
And so, David, your kind of claim to fame, your research focus mostly is on zombie ant fungus mutualisms and parasitisms and such. So,
I work on parasites and behavior, parasites that control the behavior of their hosts. I've always had an interest in insect societies, worked on wasps for my PhD, and then subsequently on ants. So many biologists are interested in social insect societies because you have that great cohesive nature where the whole group is working for the collective good. Parasites come in and mess that up. So I'm interested in both the beauty and elegance of insect societies and the way in which parasites have evolved to break into the fortress and then get out. And they often get out by controlling the behavior of the individuals. That's the zombie ants you mentioned. So in that case, you have a fungus controlling ants to leave the nest and go and die in very specific locations in tropical rainforests where we work on the underside of a leaf, and then the large fungus grows out of the back of the ant's head, producing spores which are raining down on ant trails, and the infection begins anew. So I'm interested in that junction between societies and the diseases which societies have.
It's hard to say because, I mean, zombie ant and all that sort of parasitic zombie forcing and various other parasitic things is just really cool. I mean, when people hear about things, and especially with such a huge zombie culture going on in pop culture right now, we'll have to get your opinion on World War Z in a minute. But it always comes up when you say you're an entomologist. At some point, somebody brings up that do you work on zombie ants or parasites and stuff like that? So.
Well, I think it's fascinating why people are so interested in it now. It wasn't the case just even a few years ago. It's spectacular that such a big following has gathered around this topic. Obviously reflects something in the zeitgeist among the public, but it's interesting also why so many professional biologists are becoming really interested in this as well. Something we could talk about as well if you like.
I think that's a great way to start. You mentioned that it hasn't been very heavily studied up until recently, or as exciting to perhaps the general populace, even though this is something that I think we've probably known about for a very long time, of something that's been going on. Maybe not the details, but at least field naturalists have been seeing, fungicide or fungus overridden insects for a very long time. Do you have any ideas or guesses on why it's become such a popular topic in the last couple of years?
Well, I think it has been ignored for such a long period of time because Darwin didn't feature parasites prominently in The Origin of Species. He did a whole book on barnacles and failed to mention or discuss in detail Saccharidia, which is this beautiful barnacle that gets inside crabs, manipulating their behavior, changing essentially the sexual roles of crabs from males to females. So despite being aware, because parasitologists have been working on various cool parasites for a long time, it has not featured in evolutionary biology at all. And it's only really coming in the last 20, 25 years where we have started to understand the functional roles of parasites in many different ecosystems, the biomass of parasites, the biodiversity of parasites. And now in the last 5 to 10 years, we're really seeing the formalized study of the ways in which parasites can control behavior and the mechanisms by which to do so. But I do think a lot of it has to do with the strong emission of parasite life cycles and ecology and evolution from the origin, and subsequently many evolutionary biologists really haven't considered them.
It's interesting because, like you say, parasitology is usually one of people's favorite classes in undergrad because it's just such bizarre strategies and the things that go on. So it's very odd that it's only in the last, like you say, 25 years where it's become kind of cool to study parasites professionally. And the evolutionary impacts of their lives. So is there anything particularly interesting about how some of these fungus attack colonies and how they potentially impact a colony rather than an individual?
Well, we're really at the beginning of this. We don't know to what extent they do have an effect on the colony. Our understanding so far is that the effect is minimal, if there is an effect at all. And the reason for this, despite the fact that this fungus does kill ants as a developmental necessity, controls their behavior, makes them die and leaves, despite the fact that it does kill them, for the colony, there's probably no cost, and that's probably because colonies have evolved to be large for different reasons, likely competition between ant colonies in forests, for example, where they have to maintain these large territories, or they need a large workforce for periodic catastrophes where whole groups are taken out by, for example, a tree fall. And so we do know that ant societies have a really interesting redundancy. 70% of the individuals in a nest are simply sitting there doing absolutely nothing. So when parasites do infect workers, they might infect a small percentage. We don't know how much that is. It could be 2%. And the cost of the colony is minimal. Interestingly, the cost for the individual ant, which itself is killed, is also probably non-existent because of kin selection. That ant's genes manage to leverage themselves into the next generation in the bodies of its siblings. So it dies on the doorstep of the colony, but still it manages to have a successful and positive balance in its reproductive account.
I don't actually know as much about these fungi as I should. Are they, when they attack a colony, is this epidemic or endemic?
It's epidemic. Would be if it goes. We have to think about what's the host. The host of the fungi are the individual ants, but they're also the colony itself. So epidemic would be infecting all colonies in a neighborhood, and that's what we do indeed find. Epidemic in the context of all ants in the nest, it's not epidemic. It's only a smaller proportion. We don't know how many that is. It's a horizontally transmitted parasite, but it doesn't transmit from individual to individual in the nest. It requires those ants to die and shoot spores down onto the floor of the forest where they are being picked up by foragers. So it's not a transmission that gets in and flows quickly through the nest. And in fact, it's interesting to observe that we don't see those infections inside societies where one ant becomes infected and just transmits that infection to everybody.
So it's not quite your classic zombie novel where everybody, takes over. It's interesting though, because you make a good point that because these parasites are essentially flying under the radar of from the colony's perspective, you would perhaps expect there to be more parasites that are kind of jumping into this system and taking advantage of it, rather than a couple of flies, some fungi, and a couple other perhaps things. Do you have any speculations perhaps or ideas on why ants in particular aren't more heavily parasitized in this way?
I think they are. I mean, we definitely see thousands of different species of arthropods and insects in general, insects and arthropods, which are infecting ant societies. A lot of it is buried in rather obscure parasitological journals. We haven't really seen a synthesis of that, but if you look, you don't have to look very far, but you find there's an awful lot of parasites which do call ant colonies their home. About the microbial parasites, we know about these fungi. We don't have much evidence of bacteria. We have a tiny bit of evidence of viruses. I would say that we just sort of overlooked it. Not many people work in tropical rainforests on natural ant colonies and look at the diversity of diseases that they have. Overwhelmingly, people who work on ants bring them into the lab, and as in classical enemy release, you bring things into the lab, you tend to miss the infected individuals, or you create the conditions in the lab where the disease can present itself, or you simply miss it. So I think this happens often, so people sort of underestimate the true burden of disease. But just a priori, you'd expect that there should be lots of parasites in ant societies, because 50% of all the individual insects you encounter in a tropical rainforest are ants. So that's an awful lot of free lunches out there for parasites to exploit. It's a really dominant, important, ecologically relevant group of organisms in many ecosystems, and parasites exploit that.
Are there interactions among the parasites?
No, because generally no, because you find that given that there are so many individual bodies in a nest, 10,000, 100,000, 5 million, the encounter rate between parasites is infinitesimally small. The probability of one ant becoming infected by two congeneric parasites is really small, but the probability of one parasite being host to two taxa of parasites is probably much, much smaller. It's just because there are so many potential bodies there. So we don't see those interactions.
Hmm. All right, I gotta ask because I think what the kind of stuff you guys do is really cool, but I can imagine that it gets misinterpreted a lot. Um, I imagine every time you put out a paper or a press release, the media gets a hold of it and something may go horribly wrong. Has that been the case? Have you guys had any troubles with the interpretation of your work in the public, or people banging on your doors demanding that you stop researching zombies that will kill us all, or
No, in some ways we get that little bit tongue in cheek where people say, "Oh, what would happen here, there, and everywhere." I see all of that as an opportunity to emphasize to people the probable reasons why that wouldn't happen. Um, I don't think we scientists can own the research once we release it. I think we're duty bound to speak about it and try and educate people as much as possible. I find it remarkably easy with the zombie ants. It's a great way to talk to people. They can immediately get into the details. They get that one organism controls another. They're horrified by this control, and they're immediately brought into how does this happen. So you go from the two pillars of evolutionary biology, why, to how, very, very quickly. I think the stumbling block for many debates about evolutionary biology are because we often get stuck in why. And that often leads people to battle over intelligent design versus evolution by natural selection. But if you get beyond the why something is happening and get into the how, the chemicals and nuts and bolts of it, then you really have a good conversation. And we do some of our work in South Carolina, and we find it's a really great tool for teaching evolutionary biology. So no, I don't find it's a problem. And should people take it and run away with it, well, that's fine. There's not much we can do about that.
Huh. I gotta admit, I didn't expect that answer. I, considering the sorts of things I've seen the media do with science stories, I
I
kind of
think
expected you might have trouble with that.
No, I think we scientists are far too precious. I think we have to get out of our ivory tower and engage the public. If they misinterpret it, it's our fault. It's our fault we're not explaining it well enough. We should be at pains to do that. And if somebody makes a mistake, you can gently say, that is not exactly what we meant for the following reasons, and you then take the opportunity to explain them. But if you come across as a pedant and say, "Oh, but you don't understand my deep thinking because of X, Y, and Z," well, then you're a pedant. And I think we have to do a better job of that.
I can see that. I certainly respect that viewpoint, although I don't think it's always just the scientists. I mean, I've seen some pretty bad examples.
Yeah.
I don't want to go into the dolphin thing again, but it got really out of hand.
Which dolphin?
Sorry, there was a colleague here who wrote a paper about dolphin social networks, and
Uh,
the paper used the term bisexual philopatry.
uh,
And by the time that filtered through the media, the Daily Mail was publishing stories saying Flipper is a bisexual rapist.
oh, okay. That's
Like,
ridiculous. So I completely understand how you'd be pissed. So I've never had that. I guess I've been very lucky in that people get grossed out by it, but not in a way that they think. And people don't. If they say, "Oh, this is going to take over the world," or it's going to infect humans, I say unlikely. But we do see 60% of our diseases have come from the animals that we live with, that we have domesticated as sources of food or for companion animals. So of course many diseases do come from animals, not this one unless we start eating ants or living with them very closely. So it's unlikely to happen. But no, I've never encountered the sort of issue that you're talking about. And I guess people who are working on duck penises or many areas of sexual selection, I guess in those cases their research can get quite distorted in very unfortunate ways. But I guess I'm just
Yeah.
lucky then.
Well, I mean, I kind of feel sorry for people working on like toxoplasma or bornovirus.
Well,
But
the Toxoplasma is hugely in the news at the moment because there's a paper came out today about, again about the probable the public health concerns of cats,
mm,
and it's really valid, because Toxoplasma does increase schizophrenia and suicide in young mothers and car accidents and so on and so forth. So I think people are scared.
and it's reasonable to be concerned,
Mm.
I think. Anyway, sorry, Morgan, you were gonna.
Oh no, I think it's just a fascinating conversation going on. Perhaps this is as good a time as any, as we're kind of talking about outreach. You recently were doing some consulting work for The Last of Us, which is a PlayStation 3 video game that has gotten incredibly high reviews and is kind of the summer blockbuster for the PlayStation 3, it looks like. Can you explain a little bit about how that came about and some of your experiences with working in such a totally different industry and being able to inject some science into science fiction?
All right, no spoilers though, because I haven't played it yet.
Okay.
It's on the list, and I'm waiting for it, but don't spoil anything for me.
I won't. So the game is based upon the fungus I work on. They call it Cordyceps unilateralis. The name changed to Ophiocordyceps unilateralis. But at the time, they had been inspired by the David Attenborough clip from Planet Earth, where you have the fungus growing out of the back of the head of the ant. And they just imagined, well, what would happen when if that got into humans and talked about these jumping events. And the creative directors and the people involved just kind of ran away with that and then developed it into the story where humans become infected, and then you can see that these are essentially zombies, and it's part of the game that you have to avoid these. And as you say, very well received. My role was to come in at the end and to discuss the whole issue of zoonotic infections, the fact that 60% of human diseases are indeed from the animals that we live and eat and have as companion animals. And also the ideas of pandemics in past history, the 1918 flu pandemic, and also talking about fungal diseases generally. So I was brought in not as a person who was informing the development of the game, because once they came up with the idea, they didn't really need any biology, but I came in at the end in order to discuss the reality of zoonosis and epidemic and pandemic diseases and the nastiness of fungal diseases in animals as well as in humans.
So, are they actually using the same mechanic as Cordyceps? Are they?
Yes, absolutely. So you get infected. You go through stages of infection. As the infection progresses, you lose faculties. You lose sight, but you compensate with other faculties. Rather, I like they started to then have infected individuals using echolocation in order to get around the environment, so because they were blind. And spores, of course, feature heavily in this, where you have this transmission. So I think they've done an awful lot, which is good and positive for mycology. I mean, largely, even many ecologists and evolutionary biologists know vanishingly little about fungi. It seems to be something that is far under the radar of most people. And we're talking about a eukaryotic group, which is 1/3 of all eukaryotes. It's closer to animals than plants are, of course. And still most, card-carrying evolutionary biologists know nothing about them. So I think they've done a great job in getting it out there to the public, but just generally just getting it out there. The more mycology, the better.
I think it's awesome. I haven't played it yet either, but do you think that there's a potential for this game, or for kids playing or adolescents playing this game, to become so enchanted with the idea of this biology? Is there enough unanswered there, or enough teasers there to get them interested perhaps to take another biology course, or to start looking more into this and perhaps go into evolutionary biology and parasitology as a career down the road? Do you think there's the chance for that through this game?
I think there's a possibility. I know personally, I grew up in a poor housing project in Dublin, very little nature surrounding us. My window into tropical rainforest was David Attenborough every Sunday evening, and I guess for many biologists working today, that's how we encountered nature or learned a lot about nature. But kids are not sitting down in front of the TV anymore in the way they used to. They're getting a lot of their information online, videos, games, and so on. And so I don't know if it's going to be a way to bring kids into biology, but it's certainly something we have to experiment with, because we can't imagine that the 1-hour natural history episodes and programs, which are so beautiful and well made, are going to reach everybody. And so, having seen the game, what I did learn from spending time with the gamers and the developers is that the people who are really serious about such games really get into it. They like to have the backstory. They like to know everything about it. And I think that's a perfect opportunity then to put a lot of information in front of them. And if they go on further, great. And if they just learn, that's also great. What I would add, I think it's just absolutely fantastic, because I also work with Hollywood on movies. What I also think is fantastic is that people developing these stories, they're doing such a wonderful job by increasing the sophistication. And there is no difference really between biologists who are professional and other people. We're all biologists. We're all observing behavior from the cradle to the grave. I think that people do it to greater or lesser extents, and the geeks like us happen to go on and get paid to do it. But when you see that these storytellers are bringing sophisticated ideas into movies and games, it's all for the better. It's all for the good, because you can see that people are getting more out of it.
All right. No, I agree. So you said you do some Hollywood consulting as well. Is there anything that you can talk about for things that you've worked on?
Yeah, so I was much more involved with Hollywood. I got invited early on to be consultant on World War Z, that Brad Pitt movie about zombies, which came out recently. And there my role was to answer the question, how would zombies behave? How would the infected behave if natural selection was in charge? And the way infected individuals have always behaved in zombie lore, in movies, is just at the imagination of the writer, whether it's Romero or somebody else. But if natural selection was in charge, what would you expect? Well, in that case, I'd expect three things, and that's what we spoke about. The first thing, you'd expect collective behavior. The zombies are all infected by a virus, and that virus is not genetically dissimilar. It becomes so because of rates of mutation, but if I bite you, then the virus is not dissimilar in you than it is in me, at least for a certain period of time. With that being the case, then the two of us, going on to bite Stephen, it wouldn't really matter to either of us who bit him, so long as somebody did and the virus transmitted. In that case, what you'd expect, because of kin selection, you'd expect to see that zombies should cooperate. And in the movie, that's exactly what you see. You see a swarm intelligence among infected individuals. They roll down the stairs in Jerusalem. They scale walls. They have what Oster and Wilson in 1978 called a synergy. They're more than the sum of their parts, just like ants forming bucket brigades or bridges, or bivouacs in army ants, or rafts in the case of fire ants, where they protect each individuals, or even non-related individuals like starlings and wildebeest having a power in herds, moving as a collective. So that was one of the things that was introduced to the script based upon the rules of natural selection. The other thing is choice. Would you expect an infected individual, a zombie, to bite any old person that comes across, or would there be an adaptive choice in the same way we see it in parasitic wasps? So parasitoids do choose the host they're going to lay their egg in, and if it's already infected, they may avoid laying an egg there, or if it's infected with a male egg, they may put a female in, and vice versa. So we see these fine, detailed, adaptive choices, which are really the bread and butter for much of behavioral ecology. And in the movie, that's what you see. You see that the zombies avoid individuals who have terminal cancer or some previous infections, and this comes to be something that's useful in the plot and helping Brad Pitt save the day. So that's something else you'd expect from natural selection. And the third thing we spoke about was virulence, how quickly you'd see parasites changing what they do. This was important to the development of the script. It doesn't really come out strongly, but the rate at which individuals change increases throughout the course of the movie, and that's often what you see, for example, in classical studies such as myxomatosis, the virus introduced in Australia to control rabbits. Over 10-15 years, it reduced its virulence because of the rules of natural selection and the issues of life history trade-offs. It just wasn't necessary. So I introduced some biology into the script.
You know,
Awesome.
I haven't seen the movie yet. I really want to, but is this virus in the movie, is it reanimating or is it simply controlling live hosts?
Well, you get bitten, and after 12 seconds, you're a zombie. It's not clear whether you die and then you're a zombie. It doesn't look to be the case. It just looks like it's just killed you, and you kind of got dead flesh because your arms can fall off and such things. But there's no point you die and then come back. In the book in the book World War Z by Max Brooks, you do die and come back. But this bit about reanimation, some zombie movies have it and some don't.
I've always argued that viral drivers of zombie infection would be extremely unlikely, if not close to impossible, for reasons including simple mechanistic aspects. That, you know, how is a virus going to encode the machinery required to animate a human body? Right? The genome simply isn't that large, especially if you're talking RNA viruses. Maybe, you know, dsDNA, perhaps, but even the largest dsDNA viruses, they don't have the room for a lot of this complicated machinery to actually animate, you know, a dead human body. And I don't know. Like there seems to be a lot of problems with the mechanistic aspects of a virus controlling a body like that. So I always thought it would be more, you know, fungal or bacteria. You know.
Well, there are fungi to keep the cellular processes in leaves alive after the leaf has fallen off the tree. Leaf falls off the tree, it should be dead. But the fungi are able to keep it alive and photosynthesize and keep that green patch on the fallen leaf functioning in order that the fungus can then get a food source. So the leaf is dead and the fungus keep it alive. But absolutely, the idea that you would be reanimated is you could see an effect on the nervous system. You could see that, and rabies, for example, has a very strong effect on the nervous system.
Right, but the effect of rabies on the nervous system is typically non-specific, right? Like it's simply ramping up aggression, but it's not targeted. It's not going to say, okay, you move over here and bite this guy. Right? It's just a gradual overwhelming of the nervous system, which floods aggression throughout, you know, the host.
But that's accompanied by increased spittle, increased foaming, because in that case that's where the larger number of virions are, and so that's why the bite is functionally important. So you have larger numbers of viruses in the spit, and then you see other animals, even deer, will bite, and that's how it's being transmitted. So there is this targeting.
Yeah, I think it's fascinating, and I definitely am going to have to go see World War Z. I was a little bit on the fence, but knowing that that you've been contributing and injecting so much biology and natural selection into it, I'm probably going to go next week.
Good.
Because I realize now I'm going to be watching the movie and playing the game, and I'm going to be thinking, well, I don't buy that, and it's all Hughes' fault. You know.
Well, do please blame me at any step along the way.
Yeah, because I'm sure it's all it's all your control.
That's awesome. Well, unfortunately, we've reached our time for this episode, but you're an interesting guy, so perhaps we'll have to get you back on for your zombie flick next time something else comes out. But I'd really like to thank you for coming on and telling us more about parasitism and methods for that, and just how cool some of the science fiction video games and movies are becoming more like fact. So, thanks a lot for joining us. And where can people find you and your data if they wanted to learn more about your work?
HughesLab.com.
Awesome. And on Twitter, you're
@zombieandguy.
Perfect. that should stick in everybody's mind.
I think so.
This episode.
I think so. You're welcome. Great. It was a pleasure being here. Thank you both very much indeed.
Oh, it's our pleasure. It was a great conversation. So, anybody listening at home, if you want to tune in next week, we'll have a new and exciting guest on for sure. You can find us at breakingbio.com or on Twitter at breakingbio. Thanks for listening, and we'll hear and speak to everybody again some other time.